Good morning. Morning, ladies and gentlemen, honorable ministers, mayors, dignitaries, and of course also youth representatives. It's indeed a great pleasure to welcome you to this dialogue on urban mobility and energy. And as you might be aware, the dialogues at the World Urban Forum are one of the key pillars for exchanging amongst all the Habitat Agenda partners, the governments, mayors, the private sector, NGOs, civil society, women's representatives, academicians, parliamentarians, who are all contributing to the Habitat Agenda. So these dialogues are a unique forum for all these Habitat Agenda partners to discuss the emerging priorities of UN Habitat. And urban mobility and energy have been identified as one of the key priorities of UN Habitat's work. So we at UN Habitat, and I'm the coordinator of the Urban Basic Services branch at UN Habitat, are very keen to listen to you and your guidance and your visions on the area of urban mobility and energy so that we can work with you as a follow-up in implementing your recommendations. So with this, I would like to hand over to our very esteemed moderator, Mr. Greg Clark. Thank you very much.
Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As you've heard, my name is Greg Clark. My task is to be the moderator for these two sessions on urban mobility and urban energy. I hope we're going to have a very interactive discussion. You can hear from my voice that I come from the UK, and I brought the English weather with me yesterday, which I hope you enjoyed. We designed it specially as a present for you. We're going to begin in a few minutes with me asking you some questions about urban mobility. But let me just explain firstly how our session is going to work. In a minute or two, I will introduce our esteemed panelists and our expert discussants. During the course of the next 75 minutes, we hope to have many interactions with them. So this will be a session where there are questions and answers and debates. We'll be looking for the key challenges and the key solutions, and I'll be inviting you to contribute as well with your thoughts and with your questions. I need to tell you a little bit about the arrangements, and the first thing to say is, if you're sitting at the back, some of the expensive seats are available free of charge. So please don't be shy. You can come down and sit here. It will make the conversation, I think, more dynamic. The second thing to tell you is that there is simultaneous translation and interpretation, as I think you know. Channel 1 is Italian, Channel 2 is English, Channel 3 is French, Channel 4 is Spanish, Channel 5 is Korean. All delegates are kindly requested to make sure that you return your headsets and your equipment back to the registration desk at the end of the session. Please do that. There's no value to keep this equipment. You can't use it anywhere else. And we'd be very grateful if you would do that. So I'd like to begin now by saying that urban mobility is clearly a critical issue facing not just cities and the people who live in cities, but it's obviously a critical issue for national governments and intergovernmental organizations. We know now from many years of research that transportation and mobility plays a key role in urban equality. We also know it plays a critical role in economic productivity. It's also increasingly understood to be the underpinning infrastructure for sustainability. And it's also, of course, essential if we're to have well-organized access and mobility overall within the city. So in this session, we'll talk about access to the city and the role of mobility. We'll talk about finance. We'll talk about policy integration. We'll talk about institutions, leadership, the private sector, and how we change citizen behavior. To help us to do this, I'm going to introduce our panelists and our discussants, and I'm going to ask you to welcome them. So our first panelist today is going to be the Honourable Ms. Zukota Fredericks. Ms. Zukota Fredericks is the Deputy Minister in the National Department for Human Settlements in the Republic of South Africa. Welcome, Deputy Minister. Our second speaker today is going to be the Honourable Mr. Jae-Lun Lee. He's the Vice Mayor of the city of Suwon in the Republic of Korea. Welcome, Deputy Mayor. Our third speaker today is going to be Mr. Sergio Vetrella. Sergio Vetrella is Transport and Productivity Advisor for the Campania region here in Italy, where we are now. Our fourth speaker today will be Mr. Antonio Juan Sosa. He's the Vice President of the Banco de Desarrollo de América Latina, CAF, and he's joining us here today. Welcome to you, sir. And then lastly, Mr. V.P. Baligar, who's the Chairman and Managing Director for Housing and Urban Development Corporation in India. Please will you welcome our panelists. We also have with us today 5 global experts in one dimension or another in urban access and mobility issues, and I'm going to introduce them as well. Firstly, Mr. Holger Dalkman, who is the Director of Embark. Holger, welcome to you. And sitting next to him on the left, Ms. Adriana Lobo, who is the Director for CTS Mexico for Embark as well. Welcome, Adriana. We have next to her Mr. Carlos Felipe Pardo, who's the Director of Despacio from Colombia. And sitting next to him, we have Ms. Francesca Caprini. She's the President of the association YACU, that focuses on the community dimensions of cities, and we'll hear a little bit from her in a minute. And then at this end of the panel, we have Mr. Corny Huizenga, who's the Joint Convener on Partnership on Sustainable Low-Carbon Transport. Please will you welcome our discussants as well. So we're nearly ready to begin, colleagues, but I want to begin really by asking a question for the audience. All the questions I ask you involve you saying yes or no, but you say it one at a time. If you say yes and no at the same time, it won't work. So the first question I want to ask you is to test really the sentiment in the room. If you think about it today, given everything you all know, do you think we are winning the battle to increase urban access, particularly for poor people in the cities of the world, or do you think we are losing that battle? Those who think we are winning the battle, please raise your hands. It's nice to see the optimists are awake today. Okay? Those who think we are losing the battle, please raise your hands. Wow. Okay, so the pessimists are in the majority. Those who didn't raise their hand? Okay, so a few people who don't know. So we have a very, could we say, pessimistic perspective. The second thing, do you think we are winning the battle to prevent our cities being overrun by the private automobile, the private car? Is the private car dominating the city, or have we restrained the private car? Who thinks we are winning the battle against the private car? Okay. Same hands are going up. Who thinks we're losing the battle against the private car? Okay. So again, we have, I think, a fairly similar opinion. So I hope by the end of this conversation, we will either understand how we can start winning these battles, or we will have agreed that we all do something else for the rest of our lives. It could be the right thing to do. Let's begin now, if we may, with our distinguished speakers. And I wanted to invite the Deputy Minister to share her thoughts first. The microphone will be there, Deputy Minister. Will you tell us a little bit from your perspective about why you think we are winning or losing the battle to increase access to the city, particularly for the urban poor, and what you see the role of mobility being in this, Deputy Minister?
Thank you very much.
We're going to try the other microphone. Deputy Minister, we apologise. It will come to you. Let's see.
It's about access to these instruments as well. Thank you very much, moderator. I just want to say that at the present moment, we are losing the battle in terms of ensuring that particularly the poorest of the poor are able to access transport, because the public system that is there is not as efficient as it's supposed to be. For example, I'm coming from the angle of human settlements, which means from the angle of housing. We believe that we can fight this battle by ensuring that we build houses closer to the places of work, so that people don't spend most of their time on the road and spend most of their money on transport. For example, people wake up very early in the morning, they come very late at night, which means there's no contact between the working people and their families. On the other hand, the many people who are using their cars to work, there's congestion on the road. So definitely there's air pollution taking place there. So we believe that those areas of work needs a kind of an approach that says, let's do things differently. Let's increase efficient public transport. I thank you.
Deputy Minister, can I ask you just to say a few words more about, for example, the situation of women? Is it your view that women in cities, women as part of the urban poor community, face particular challenges or constraints that we need to understand and address better?
Definitely. Women face it because you must remember that women are also doing household chores, which means they go to work very early in the morning, they have to come back very late at night, but at the same time they have to look after their families. So it's a burden on the women. It means that when we do things like that, we must make sure that those women who do work, in particular, we make it a point that they we build houses close to the places of work, as I've said. In fact, what we were saying in South Africa, we need to densify our cities so that people live side by side, the rich and poor, because for us it's good for cross-subsidization, so that people benefit from the fruits of their labor.
Deputy Minister, thank you very much indeed. We'll hear some more from you in a minute if we may. We're going to give the microphone to the Deputy Mayor, if that's okay, who's sitting on your right. Deputy Mayor, if I may ask you to begin, I'd like to know what you think about the question as to whether we are winning the battle against the private car or not. And then I'd like to ask you, what do you see particularly to be the role of city governments in this challenge to address urban mobility, and how do the city governments work with the national governments? What should be the relationship?
Yeah. Please use the headset. 예. 브레이클락 감사합니다. 예. 대한민국 수원시의 부시장 이재준입니다. 예. 저는 그간 학자의 연구 경험과
And Vice President and Vice Mayor of Suwon. I'm a scholar and a town planner, and I have long-standing expertise. I would like to speak about mobility in two ways. We need to build towns that are compact, and we must build towns where there is mixed land use. Therefore, a compact town that can enable urban expansion, and it shortens the distance in traveling. So the commercial areas, the inhabited areas, and the working areas should be as close as possible to each other. And it is important not to allow the towns to sprawl in a disorderly fashion. For instance, in the European towns, the relationship, the floor area ratio is very low. In Asia, the ratio is 300%. So the Asian towns are not at all compact towns, and this is why we are thinking to set this right to the extent possible and to promote mixed land use. And therefore we need to do this in order to cope with the issue of environmental change. the towns now are dominated by personal cars, and instead we need to turn this around and create car-free cities. The towns must be centered on the individual. It must be people-centered. Therefore, we must move away from the emphasis that there is on cars and create towns that are car-free. People living on the outskirts of the town can use public transport, light trains, and in the inner city, people can use bicycles, carts, or electric cars. We are experimenting with this in Suwon, my town. We are promoting initiatives to create a car-free city. So next year, in Suwon, we will be holding the international conference called Eco Mobility, which will last for a whole month. And I would like to invite you to come to Suwon in September next year to Korea, so that. And we also do monitoring work. We monitor the situation. We are currently experimenting with the possibility of eliminating the CO2 or reducing it. We have already reduced it by 15%. But we need to do more work and reduce it even further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. And your comment that the key is the compact city and the integration of land use with accessibility is a theme I want to take up next, if we may, with Mr. Vetrella, who will speak next. Mr. Vetrella, you represent, of course, a regional government here in Campania. So I'd like to know what you think is the particular role of the regions, and how, following the Deputy Mayor, do you think the accessibility policies need to be connected to other policies? Which are the policies that must be integrated?
Sì, grazie.
Thank you. Well, first of all, the role of the region from the standpoint of the government, and therefore my role as Minister for Transport and for Industry, is to fight against the government in order to get the necessary resources to pay for the services and to invest in transport. Obviously, the Italian organization entails that each region, and I'm the coordinator of all Italian regions for this purpose, so I'm the person who has to fight with the government or against the government on this issue, because well, I would like to emphasize two aspects. There are two aspects to the issue. The funds that are made available to provide services to the citizens, and the other are the funds that are indispensable in order to develop new infrastructure for transport. Now, with regard to your question, when we speak about investments in transport, undoubtedly the most serious problem is area planning. We need to think that for large railroad and road infrastructure, the time for building them takes years and years and years. I would like to make the example of the infrastructure that we're working on right now, which is the link between Naples and Bari in the south of Italy, further south, therefore. The investment is worth 6 billion euros, and it's taking 15 years. So the most complex capacity is planning, because a transport project has to link up with the existing reality, and it's not only a question about moving people about, but here we have an even more serious problem, which is that of the transport of merchandise and commodities. Today, economic development and also the poles of attraction in terms of number of people in the various geographic areas, well, all this is linked also to the economic development of that particular area. So my first answer to your question is this. On the one hand, the region has the role of interacting with the national government, and obviously this is very much in a nutshell, because the answer would be much more complex. On the other hand, we have the role of doing planning for the whole region, that is for 7 million inhabitants, and therefore plan the organization of the services, and suffice it to think that we not only have roads and trains, but also we have ferries that connect our region with the islands, and therefore we need to organize this and then integrate area planning and infrastructure planning in order to carry out the works that are to be created, therefore the metropolitan network for the whole region, and the combining roads with railroads and with sea transport. Now, when you were asking whether we're losing the battle or not, if we think about what transport means for the poor, for the underprivileged, and I'll make an example that I see that's before my eyes every day. Since we put the money of our citizens into the service, the cost of the service, and I'll make an example. A citizen in Campania pays €1.20 for a ticket on public transport. The person is paying 1.2, but the rest of the citizenship is adding 4 or 5 euros. The hovercrafts from Naples to Capri, the residents and those who work there receive some benefits, receive some advantage, because you can't expect them to pay a high price for their traveling back and forth. So it's one thing if it's the rich tourist that takes the hovercraft to go to Naples, to Capri, and he takes his. Why should he pay? Should he pay only the social cost, and all the other citizens, and therefore the poor citizens, should pay the difference of the actual cost for that trip? Or should we have differential tickets or fares depending on the wealth of the citizens? Well, we have chosen to have a single integrated ticket. So you can, with one ticket, you can take the underground or the bus or whatever, the train and the hovercraft, and also the electric car, the bicycle, and so on. So the answer to your question is very, very complex, but I hope I've given you an idea.
Very much indeed, Mr. Vetrella. And you said at the beginning the key relationship, in a sense, is between transport and economic development, and you talked about the logistics platform and land uses, but then you came on to talk about how you create a system which has access for the poor but is sustainable in its own way. So thank you very much for that. I'd like to come to Mr. Sosa and to Mr. Baliga. I'd like to ask you, gentlemen, the same question, if I may. And maybe we begin with Mr. Sosa and then Mr. Baliga. I think we have 2 microphones. Firstly, there's a common view that the big problem is financing. And really, I want to know if you agree. Is the problem really financing, or is it something else? And I'd like to know from your point of view, Mr. Sosa, what's the role of the intergovernmental level, the multilateral lending institutions? And Mr. Baliga, what's the role for the national government in all of this? Can we begin with you, Mr. Sosa?
Yes.
Yes?
Thank you. I would say that finance is a task to have to be accomplished. Sometimes it's complex, sometimes it's simpler. If you go for a sovereign loan with a good country, with good ratings, it's a piece of cake. If you go for a private partnership or a private concession, you have to analyze your risk very well, and sometimes it's risky, more risky than others. And you could have problems with big structures. High-speed trains, for example, are difficult because you never know the demand, you never know the costs, the hidden costs of construction, and that makes the problem harder to solve, and you are facing higher risks, and the analysis and the due diligence takes longer time. But I wouldn't say that in what we are talking now in transport, the financing is the main problem.
Right.
I think the main problem here is what we know about our cities, the knowledge we have, the knowledge we develop, the data we collect at the field level, and we transform in information to know really how our city is functioning, is working. And because that's the base for good planning. And for good planning that integrates the main areas of the city that has to be planned in an integrated way. It is very difficult to make urban planning if you don't take into account at the same time the transport planning. If you don't look at the mass transport systems, say metro system or BRT or buses or whatever, it depends on the size of the city. If you don't look at that at the planning level, you are really planning for the cars only, because that's the more powerful force that you have in the city. And if you allow that the houses and buildings, residence buildings, are placed whenever the supply gives you and buys the plots of land, you are planning for the cars. And I don't like the word war with the car, because it's more a negotiation with the car. The car has been for many decades a wonderful instrument for our development and for our needs, for transport needs. Very recently has shown his weakness in terms of environment, in terms of congestion, and that means cost for everybody. And we need to reach a settlement with the car. That means that we have to know where people are, how the people is transporting, it's moving, and for that we need knowledge and put some money and some effort in knowledge, and that's what we in CAF are doing now, not more than financing, but it's an agenda that is growing, and we set up 5 years ago an observatory of urban mobility in Latin America, and we have now 15 of the major cities, under our microscope, generating data every year, and we are adding 10 cities more. So we are amplifying the vision we have. I think that's the main, one of the main problems we have.
Thank you very much indeed. So your key message is money is important, but money on its own is not enough. Knowledge and know-how in urban management and urban integration is critical, and we have to reach a settlement with the car, not to win a war with the car. It's a very good point. Mr. Balagar, your perspective, what do you think is critical? Is it money or something else? And what is the key role for national government in all of this?
In the beginning, you did ask a question to the audience, whether they're pessimists or optimists. I'm an optimist. And though the situation is grim, in India, we have 1,200 accidents per day, and 300 people lose their lives every day. Situation is grim. In the city of Bangalore, I'm sure all of you know Bangalore is the IT city of India, 1,000 vehicles are added every day. Therefore, the challenge is very huge. However, there is a hope. The national government has come out with the National Urban Transport Policy in 2006 for providing safe, affordable, fast, comfortable and reliable and sustainable urban transport. And as part of this, a national renewal mission has been launched by Government of India in year 2006. It is known as Jawaharlal Nehru Urban National Renewal Mission. The focus is also on urban infrastructure in addition to housing, and so far $7 billion have been provided to the local governments by the central government. And for urban mobility, especially for buses, eco-friendly buses, about $500 million has been released. We also have, yes, finance is a problem. However, especially to get the funding from international agencies. The local bodies and provincial governments find it very difficult to mobilize. They have too many rigid conditions. But in India, we have Housing and Urban Development Corporation. I am the chairman of this corporation. We provide long-term, easy loans to the urban local bodies as well as provincial governments. And so far, we have lent nearly $500 million for buses, for metros, metro rail system, for BRT. Government of India also has taken 50% equity in many of the metropolitan cities where metro rail system is being implemented. For example, in Delhi, of course, it is majority by national government, but in Kolkata, in Bangalore already 7 kilometers of metro rail has been commissioned, another 40 kilometers is under implementation, we'll have another 100 kilometers in the next 7 years. In Mumbai, the system is on PPP basis. So we have involved private sector in the metro rail connectivity. In Jaipur, it is again fully funded by Government of India and state government, and HUDCO has provided sanctioned loan to Jaipur Metro. Also in Chennai and Hyderabad, again, metro rail systems are coming up. In Hyderabad, it is on PPP basis. In 11 of our cities, out of 61 million plus cities, we have BRT, bus rapid transit system, coming up. And we have learned this from South America, our friends from Colombia and Bogota and maybe in Brazil. So in addition to this, in order to have proper transport system and also eco-friendly buses, our Motor Vehicle Act has been amended to make our vehicles international standard compliant and environment friendly. Now in Delhi we have the highest number of CNG buses, so that environmental concern is taken care of. We are very sure that in the coming years, may not be in the immediate future, but maybe within a decade or so, we should be able to provide friendly transport to the urbanites. Especially it should be friendly for women, like our Deputy Minister from South Africa said. And it should also be children friendly, disabled friendly, and senior citizen friendly and pedestrian friendly. Because most of the accidents in urban area, they affect the pedestrians. Therefore, it should be pedestrian friendly as well. Thank you.
Great. Mr. Balaga, thank you very much indeed. If anybody wants to applaud, you can. It is allowed. So, thank you. We've had some wonderful comments from our panelists, and we're going to have a few more in some minutes. But what I want to do now is really to ask our discussants for their opinions, and then I want to ask you for your opinions. So please be ready, because you'll have one chance, and we'll take as many as you can. Discussants, you're global experts on these issues, but I'm going to ask you to really answer 2 questions each. And the first question is going to be, how did you interpret the vote that we had at the beginning? Why are people so pessimistic, and are they right to be pessimistic? And then, if we may, Courtney, I'd like you to say something about what you think needs to happen at the global level. And Holger, would you say something about the national level? What is the national governments? What do they need to do? Adriana, can you say something about the role of the cities? Francesca, can you comment on the role for communities and local NGOs? Should they do something? And then, Carlos, could you say something about what really motivates the citizen to do anything about these kinds of challenges? So, Courtney, beginning with the global level, some comment from you. Are they right to be pessimists, or how do you interpret that view, and what needs to happen at the global level?
Thank you, Greg. I live in a city called Shanghai, and in this city of Shanghai we have 24 million people, and we barely have congestion. There are almost no traffic jams. Why is that? Since 15 years you can no longer just go to the shop and buy a car. Before you go and buy a car, you need to have a permit. And these permits are being auctioned every month. And each month only 8,000 car permits are auctioned. So Bangalore has 1,000 cars a day. Shanghai, with 24.6 million people, only has 8,000 cars in a month. Consider the difference. And I think that that is the message for the future. So I would say, have we lost the battle? No. Are we losing? I would say in some cases yes, but at the same time I would say that there are very clear solutions on the horizon. Today in the Herald Tribune there is an article on Guangzhou, another city in China, which in a period of economic downturn for China, which is 6% economic growth, they have also introduced this system. Beijing has introduced it. So what we see is that China is really changing the way that they look at the relationship between vehicles and transport. And I think, as Mr. Sosa said, the negotiations in China are going in a different way that they are going in Latin America than in India. So then the next question on the global level. It's clear that 5 years ago we talked about the need for sustainable transport. We were thinking, what is sustainable transport? We were trying to find nice examples in Latin America. 5 years later, we just came out of a conference called Rio+20, where 50,000 people agreed that sustainable transport is an integral part of sustainable development, and where 8 development banks together pledged $175 billion for more sustainable transport. So in that sense, I would say that there is a lot of movement. And we see that it's clear that we can win this. And I was a little bit disappointed with the vote that the entire mobility section of UN Habitat raised their hand and say that they were pessimistic and that we were losing. Because I think that the best champions are the people who believe in their cause. It's very difficult to go out campaigning and say, look, we don't think that it can be done. And so in that sense, I think that these people on the right-hand side, good politicians as they are, smart people, they say this can be won. And I support that.
Thank you very much, Corny. And before Holger speaks, let's take one more vote. Let's change the wording. If you think the battle to succeed in creating urban mobility and to reduce the dominance of the car can be won, raise your hand. If you think it can be won. Not it is being won, but it can be won. Thank you. If you think it can't be won. Okay, very good. We'd like to hear from you in a minute, if you would like to tell us why. Okay, thank you very much. Holger, please.
Thanks, Greg. I can understand that there is a certain pessimism, because when we look into the trend we're facing, and in terms of congestion, in terms of air pollution, in terms of road accidents, currently 1.3 million people die on roads, mostly pedestrians, mostly the vulnerable people. The predictions are all going in the wrong direction, increasing CO2 emissions, increasing energy demand, increasing road fatalities. So the trends are all telling us we should be pessimistic. But when I'm seeing also here the key players from the national government, from the cities, from the international banks, from the regional corporations, from the business side, and they're all saying, yes, we need accessibility for everybody, we need this in an affordable way, we need the quality of life in cities, then I actually can see also that I hope at the end we can be far more optimistic. Because at the end of the day also, we have the knowledge, we have the solutions. Every city has a different solution, and we also need, in fact, which I really liked also was 2 times also saying we need also the right information, we need the data. It's not really sexy to say that, but it's in fact, if you can't measure, you can't actually manage. So therefore, that is also an important thing when it comes also to national governments. So going also to the second part, what can also national governments do? National governments can do 2 things. On the one hand, looking into the supply side. So therefore, in some countries, like in Europe, in France, in Germany, but also in Brazil, there's a right of mobility. So accessibility is in the core of the constitutional right, of the Constitution. And that also provides then also a framework on finance, but also sends a signal also to cities. But it's also about providing the right support, providing also the finance for public transport, and we heard the Indian example. But the Indian example is also has a caveat, and we worked in India also with our centers, also helping with the program in Jaipur. So there was a large fund also coming, 400 buses to Jaipur, but there was not the institution there there were just 2 people also in Jaipur in the transport department, and just one state-owned government-owned bus company who say, oh, we don't want the 400 buses. So therefore helping then also to develop the institution, to provide also the solution. So here also there's a role for government, not just also providing also the funding, but also the support for institutional setups, the support also for capacity. On the other hand, the demand side. We're spending currently around $300 billion every year on fuel subsidies. And this sending often also the wrong message in terms of what kind of transport should be used. I'm not saying fuel subsidies in general are always bad, but there is also a certain level. This is not really often benefiting also the poorest of the poor. So also national government make a choice where to also invest the money. So reducing that, and then also providing finally also the right economic frameworks also in terms of the cost also of the car use. And then I can see that this is sending also the right signal, and then we need the champions in the cities and all the other players, and then we have also a more positive picture hopefully in the future.
Holger, thank you very much indeed. Let me ask you just a cheeky question. If you look at the 220, 230 national governments that exist around the world, what percentage do you think have a good policy on urban mobility?
It's a good question.
You're allowed to.
Of becoming really in a politician way here. So I think there are lots of governments who have also certain elements.
Yeah.
They would have, if you would say, is there an optimal solution at the moment? I would say 0. If we would look for certain party policies, then I would say 95%.
Okay, so 95% have some good policies, but 0% have the complete package. Okay, Courtney, what's your view on the same question? What percentage of national governments have the right policies?
I would say that I would go along the lines what Holger is saying, but there are intergovernmental processes which are happening in Asia, in Latin America, where governments have signed up to declarations on sustainable transport. So I think that that's not really the issue. I think that the issue is, as Mr. Sosa was also saying when we were talking beforehand, like if you have the policy but you don't have the people, like it's what Holger is saying, like if you have the buses but you don't have the people to look after them. If you have the policies but you don't have the financial mechanisms. So in that sense, it's really a question of glass is half empty, half full. So I would say increasingly they are putting water in the glasses.
Okay.
And that I think is the important thing.
So the glasses are getting fuller.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And panelists, in a minute I ask you to make any comments you want on what our discussants have said. But Adriana, can we ask for your brief comments? Are they right to be pessimists, or how do you interpret them? And what's the particular role for the city governments?
Okay, so I would say I really agree with the public in terms of, I think we are not winning the battle, but I think we can win the battle, which are really 2 different things. So why are we not winning the battle, in my opinion, and coming from Mexico City? Well, IBM made an index Spain for traveling. And Mexico City is in the first place of really suffering in traveling.
Most painful place to travel.
And São Paulo is not in the list. I am from Mexico and São Paulo, and I would say São Paulo would be even worse. And I can understand that. People are spending 5 complete years inside a car in Mexico City, and that's not good. We are breathing bad air. We have 4,000 people dying because of air quality. It's much better than in the past, but still there is an issue there. And we have very high rates of accidents in the city, or in general in the country. It's like 24,000 people dying in the country. So I don't think we can think we are winning the battle today. I think the steps that have been given are, they bring hope of change. It's like you can see people really biking in the city today, which did not happen in the past. You can see young people really wanting to change the way they live in the city, searching for other solutions, wanting to live in the neighborhoods where there is access to bikes and other things, but there is a big problem of exclusion. People that are poor are living outside of the city, very cheap houses. They are 3 hours away from the city, and we cannot really envision a good life for them in quite a long time. So I would say that the cities are the key stakeholders in two different ways, not only the governments, but also the citizens. And the advance really needs clear vision, a lot of coherence. It seems like we can do both things, build a nicer city and build flyovers, and both can combine and make a good city. And I think this is not possible in the long run. I think we really need to go for car restriction, more investment in public transport. I mean, if you go both ways, you probably get nowhere. And organization is as important as the investment. So I think we need to invest a lot of capacity building, organization, really creating the institutions and the good service providers. One last comment is that I really think cities can and they will be more active in mobility in the future. We started a program just a few months ago trying to organize the companies in an area of the city. Great Places to Work had joined us, and 3/4, like 75% of the people who work in major companies, Microsoft, or I don't know, very big companies in this area, 75% said the worst thing for them to work in this company is the travel time. It's not their bosses. It's not because they don't like the company. It's not how much they pay them. It's because they take 1 or 2 hours to get to the company. So 25 companies are trying to take action for some time. So I really see that the role of the citizens and the companies and the society as a whole is going to change in the future.
Great, Adriana, thank you very much indeed. We won't ask you the question, what percentage of all the city governments around the world have the right urban mobility policies, but maybe somebody wants to comment on that in a minute. Francesca, may we come to you and ask you just for a perspective, are we winning or losing the battle? Can we win the battle? Is our audience right to take the view they take? And what is the role for local NGOs, community organizations, these kinds of groups?
Sì, allora io faccio parte di un'associazione che lavora attorno ai beni comuni.
I'm part of an association that works on public assets, and so I'd like to talk about transportation from that point of view. Public transportation as a common good, as a public asset. And very simply what I could say is that as long as transportation is based on market-related logic, we know that we won't see that those values asserted. If instead transportation is seen as a good of society, part of society, then transportation, the quality of life, defense of life, it's all part of an integrated approach, and transportation will be taken into account from that point of view. By saying that it is a common good, transportation, means that we're rethinking our society, and we're saying that this is an important part of our lives, and this important part of our lives can be organized with the participation of citizens in many different ways. And when citizens have their chance to influence a common good, they have their voice matters, then they can suggest solutions that really do meet the needs of the people living in cities. We know that cities and citizens are really the first safekeepers of an area, of a territory, and they are the ones who offer new solutions, new surprises. So to answer Greg's questions, I would suggest that the role of communities and the role of social organizations, of citizens' organizations, is really the role of safekeepers and of those people who stand up for their own rights, advocates for their own rights. I can think of many communities where our associations work, and in particular in Bolivia. And there are many communities that have been able to self-organize and overcome huge difficulties. And if we look at Latin America as a whole, then we can think of the great battles that were waged over what is the number one public asset, that is water. So to answer the main question, I think that certainly there can be breakthroughs. Certainly we can look forward to a good measure of victory in our battles, but we have to think of how to organize our society outside of a very strictly market-oriented logic.
The interpretation is just taking a little time. So your main point is that urban transportation should be seen as a wholly owned public good, like the water system, the parks, the schools, not like the shops, the hotels, the things that are confined to the market, and that the role of the local communities in a sense is to take ownership and to promote ownership so that these things are organized in the right way, I think. Carlos, may we come to you and ask you firstly, do you think that people are right to be pessimistic? But please share us your particular insights about the citizens. What is it that really motivates citizens to adopt choices which in their aggregate have the right effects in terms of urban transport and mobility?
Yeah, thank you. I think this audience actually should be pessimistic. Because we have to really wake up every morning and say, I really have to get up and start solving this. Otherwise, if you're an optimistic and too much of an optimist, you say, well, I can sleep half an hour more. Right? And it's good that you inhabit that people are there saying, well, we really, really, really have to work on this, because there's a lot to be done still. Because we all know what we're up against. If it would be general population, maybe it would be different. But here I think it's good to be a pessimist. And it's almost necessary, in my point of view. A little bit exhausting, but in any case, I think it's necessary. And in terms of motivated citizens, I think that in some of the current conditions in many cities, it's a little bit difficult to motivate citizens to take public transport or to ride a bicycle or to even walk, because the conditions are not there. And it's actually very dangerous to use many of these modes of transport, or it's very uncomfortable, or it's not necessarily the best conditions to tell them, go, use the bus. You're at 7 people per square meter. Please use it and have a great time. So there are a lot of steps to be taken there. And one of them starts by having people like the ones we have on our panelists, which are good policymakers, which are taking the right decisions, which are putting the money where it is, like the Jaraneru renewal mission, which is really doing projects that are going to improve the conditions of public transport, which are going to improve the infrastructure for people who are walking, who are going on bicycles, and developing appropriate land use. And I think that is the first step, so that then we can come in and complement with motivations to the citizens. And then when we have that, and where we already have that, the ones which have the luck to have very good conditions for in public transport or in urban transport in general, then we can tell them, we have to start by using arguments which are not necessarily environmentally related. We have a lot of promotion campaigns which are telling people, ride a bus or use the bicycle because it's environmentally friendly. And it's not really what moves people. People just want to get to their jobs quickly and comfortably. You have to tell them that. How is it that they're going to get there? And I think we really have to focus on providing that service and then showing them how it is, and then finding a way to presenting that message in a way that they say, this is good for me. And then they'll see it's good for the environment. I think those are the key issues.
Okay, Carlos, so I think you said, firstly, we have to get the context right. The choices have to be there. But secondly, we have to make the case then in terms of personal motivation, not environmental motivation or something else. You have to make it attractive to the individual in terms of the daily tasks that they face.
And we have to motivate the policymakers as well to start changing everything. That is the first task, is me as a psychologist, I have to go and tell every mayor, change.
Okay. Thank you very much. Now, I want to invite the audience to participate, but just before we do that, there's a moment for very short comments from our panelists. Deputy Minister, you're first. Any comment on what you heard that you want to make? Just short comments, please.
It's a short comment. I just want to say that in South Africa, we have motivated people to use rail, for example, instead of their cars. Train is one of those examples. It's very rapid, it's very reliable. They've done that. In Cape Town, we have what is called rail ride, which means you leave your car and you get into the bus, which is fast. And people have done that. You see, we also have in Johannesburg the BRT, Rea Vaya. So we have those examples where people are motivated to leave their cars and get to the bus quicker, and they've done that.
And those who haven't seen them should go and see them, both in Johannesburg and in Cape Town. Other brief comments from our panelists? Yes, Mr. Sosa?
I think expectations play a good role here in optimism and pessimism. If you think that the process will be short, quick, and it's not, you get pessimistic. I mean, I think this process is complex and it will take much more time than we anticipate. We don't know yet how long it will take. But I would think in terms of decades, several more decades to really we feel satisfied that we are settling this problem we have with the car. Because we have alternatives, efficient and effective alternatives that are seen that way. And I think the market forces have a role here. It's not necessary. You could create a public entity to run everything. That's fine. But, for example, Bogota has shown how to do that with the market forces, I mean with the private enterprise operating BRT, Transmilenio, along Bogota in several lines. So it has not to be only public. The public government has a role, but the private sector has a role too.
Deputy Mayor, you want a quick comment?
예, Please have said. 전쟁에서 저는 이겨야 된다고 생각합니다. 저희 수원시 같은 경우는
Yes, well, in our city, in Suwon, we have started working at a political and administrative level and taken many steps. But we think it's very important also to have participation of citizens. And we were very successful in the initiatives that we had for this. We also had a process to help ensure livable neighborhoods involving the citizens, and that too worked very well. And the citizens were quite happy and willing to contribute to the process to make our city more livable. A car-free city is really becoming a fact now.
Mr. Baligar, you can go first.
I would like to share some of the good examples of citizen participation in India, especially in the city of Bangalore. The IT professionals of Bangalore, some of them have come together and they have given a solution of optimization of public transport system, especially the city bus service, to the corporation of. So they have implemented that. There were buses, but there were no people there. In some other area, there were passengers standing, but buses were not coming. So optimization of bus route planning has been done now. In addition to that, some of the IT professionals have, through their network, have created something called carpooling. From the same area, instead of 4 or 5 cars going with just one passenger, now through their mobile phones, they have developed a network and maybe 3 or 4 people together go. The third one is something called Bus Day is celebrated in Bangalore. This was the idea of our transport minister. Every month, once a day, everybody is encouraged to take buses. Even he himself goes by bus to the office. Otherwise, you know, many of the ministers travel with not only one car, but even escort and pilot. So many bureaucrats also travel by buses on that particular day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paliga. Mr. Vetrella?
Yes, thank you. Let me say that I'm optimistic.
Good.
In the frame of what we have been discussing, I am an engineer, and we take into account the time dimension. And therefore, I want to stress and point out that we are facing a problem that requires a multi-year strategic program. We cannot solve this thing, let me say, in 1 year or 2 years. This is something that we have to take into account because technology is moving. I mean that when we discuss of transport systems, technology is now playing a significant role in improving it. And therefore, let me say with respect what are your questions and the answers, I do believe that the feeling and knowledge that is everywhere in the world today about environment, about sustainable life and so on, they are the key points that are certain from the point of view that we are going to win this game, and we require the time that is necessary to have the necessary investments and to develop these infrastructures that require a long time to be done.
Thank you very much. So our panelists have emphasized patience and ambition, but also technical know-how and integration. And also we had many examples. Holger, if we may, I'm going to come to you in a few minutes. What I want to do now is open up the floor. We have simple rule. Anyone can ask a question as long as you keep it short. We don't need to know any of your background, just the point you want to make. And it could be a question or a comment on what you heard so far. The microphone will come around. We have Yasmin is holding it there. One hand is here. If you keep your hand held, the microphone will come. And I'm going to ask one of my colleagues if we can take a second microphone into the floor. If you keep your hand up, sir, you were first, you're second, you're third. So, thank you very much, Yasmin. If you can come down here. Great. And we're going to take 7, 8, 9, 10 points now, and then we ask our panelists and our discussants to respond. Yes, sir.
Yes. Thank you. I was one of the optimists.
Good.
And what makes me optimistic is a few trends. We know people can change cities and can change the world. We saw it in the 70s in some European cities where people stood up and they wanted to preserve their historical cities, and they did choose for more cycling and walking and restriction for cars. We have a trend in Germany. Research shows you that young people live in urban areas. In the future will not care about car. They will move in another way. And the third thing makes me optimistic is what Holger Daltman stressed yesterday and today again. We have the best practice. We know what to do. It is not only data and research, it is just implementation. And we have some good political leaders in this world that can make a difference. Listening to Mr. Kloos from UN Habitat, going to mayors like Park Wan-soo in Changwon cities. These kind of people will lead the people to change the cities. And I agree with Carlos. We have to, not to motivate people to tell them what is good for the environment. We have to change the conditions. The conditions to change for bicycling and walking, we can do. So finance it, and they will go biking and walking.
Okay, so if you fund it, they will use it. Thank you. Yes, sir. Can we have the other microphone, please, to come to the gentleman behind? Yes, sir, you're next. Where's the other microphone? Yes, Maria Rosa? Please.
Can you win the battle against the private cars? That was the question.
Yes.
So I would say that we can win the battle provided one of the key aspects of urban transport is taken care of or addressed properly, and that is the appropriate pricing of urban transport. You know, planning, financing would not work unless we have an appropriate pricing policy. Like our first discussion said that we should have licensing. Okay, that can work in Shanghai, that may not work in India. So we should have other pricing, like Greg might be knowing about the London congestion tolls. So similarly, we have so many things, Singapore congestion pricing models. So the countries like India, we should also address these issues, and for this our politicians need to be explained about this issue. I can say that in 1995, okay. So, okay.
Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah.
You were about to enter a nice long anecdote for another day. Yes. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I was missing in the discussion the word information technology. Okay. It has been raised a little bit by you from India, but I mean, this is today a means of mobility. If I take my mobile phone today, I mean, I'm arguing from a European perspective at the moment, but I can get my my timetable for the next bus, for the next tram on my mobile phone on time. I can book a car-sharing car with my mobile phone on stage. So I got rid of my car because I don't have the need anymore for a car, because I have seamless mobility with information technology. Of course, it takes a lot of initiatives, the public transport operators, to bring data sets together. It's a hell of a complex system, but I think it's a system which is transferable also to other countries, and China, everybody is using these smartphones. So I think that should be taken more into discussion in these mobility discussions.
Thank you very much. So far, we've had comments about the positive trends and the role of leadership. We've had a comment about the important mechanism of pricing and how we use that to drive change. And we've had a key observation about IT. I'll be asking our panelists and our discussants to comment on some of these points in a minute. We have some more people waiting. I just want to point out, it's not compulsory to be male to make a point or to ask a question. You can also do it if you're female. It's generally very much encouraged. Yes, you will go next. And then one of the gentlemen will come back. Very good. Thank you.
Hi, Samantha Hung, Asian Development Bank, and it's very appropriate to follow that, because the point I was going to say is that I think one key strategy for winning the battle is to give greater attention to gender analysis. And I think if you want a successful urban public transport system, we all know globally that women are greater users of public transport. They're less likely to own a car. They're less likely to be able to afford different forms of transport. It's really important to have the data question, gender analysis of different travel use patterns, and using that to inform investments, whether that be the location of a particular bus route which is linked to women's employment patterns, and also in the process of the physical design, how to make sure that a public transport service and the way the ticketing works, the scheduling, actually meets the needs of women as well as men, and also how you can use the development of any public transport service to actually promote women's employment, whether that be through construction, through new kinds of jobs that are created at stations, as drivers, etc. I think this is a different angle that perhaps has not been given enough attention yet this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. And gentlemen, be patient. The microphone is going to come to you. But I want to hear for a minute from Bernard. Where's Bernard? Yes, please. Could we have a little statement from you, please?
Yes. So dear audience, dear panel members, it's a great honor for me to present to you the Naples 2012 Declaration on Urban Youth and Mobility. We discussed this at the World Urban Youth Assembly, which happened on Sunday. So I'm just going to kind of highlight a brief couple of points we discussed. So we, the urban youth of the world, have met in Naples and discussed challenges and opportunities for sustainable urban mobility. We recognize that the youth of the world faces a number of challenges related to urban mobility. We have prepared and adopted this declaration to proclaim our commitment to address urban mobility opportunities and challenges, and call for global leaders to actively support the development of sustainable transport systems for future generations. We, the urban youth of the world, need sustainable mobility that does not harm the environment and our fellow citizens. We need sustainable mobility that allows us to access jobs, education, healthcare opportunities, and take part in the social life of the city. We call for all concerned stakeholders to acknowledge the role of youth in urban mobility by ensuring their full and effective engagement at decision-making processes at all levels. We commit to be more aware of the impacts our daily travel choices have on the environment, urban life and the economy. With this declaration, we, the urban youth of the world, are committed to promote the issues we addressed and to facilitate the implementation of our demands for the future of sustainable mobility.
Bernard, thank you very much indeed. This is the statement. The statement from the Urban Youth Forum that took place here on Sunday, and I believe you're going to hand this declaration now to Dr. Singh from UN Habitat. So thank you very much indeed, Bernard, and your colleagues. Thank you. And Dr. Singh, I understand, is receiving this respectfully. So thank you very much indeed. We had two more gentlemen who were waiting. Thank you for being patient, sir. Thank you for being patient. You're next, sir. Okay. Yes. And then yourself, sir, after. Yeah.
In the developing economies, owning a car is a life ambition for people. It's a dream. It's a dream and it's a life ambition, and it's a symbol of achieving a level of progress after hard work in the earlier years. Telling them when they reach that stage, don't own a car. Possibly it is possible in Shanghai, but I doubt whether it's possible in India. In this context, what I thought is our emphasis should be more on how do we build infrastructure to support for this. And more than that, management techniques, transport management techniques implementation is more important. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Yourself, sir.
Good morning. My name is Yamin. I come from a city called Dhaka. I guess many of you would know it for it being so crowded. And I would like to compliment what Mr. Petrella said in terms of technology is moving. I'm a very big supporter of hybrid technology and regenerative brakes. It's a pity to see that in Dhaka, it's not only congestion, but all the cars stand still are belching out carbon dioxide and all the pollutants. If technology can address even that bit, it would be a good help to the environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to remind you we have no preference in terms of XY or XX chromosomes in the people who ask the questions or make the points. You're next, sir, and then you, sir, are second. And anyone else, then this will be the last ones. I'm looking for some of our female delegates to come in. So.
Okay, thank you. I would like to offer a new paradigm saying that, of course, improving transport facilities, but why not also trying to adapt the city or to build the city to reduce the needs for transport, using IT, using proximity services, using all efforts to encourage people to reduce the need for mobility. Not preventing liberty, but...
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So, a new paradigm shift. We've got one colleague up there, your madam, sir, and then you, sir, and then after that. Yes.
Hello, I'm from UNEP Transport Unit, and I believe that one issue that we have missed in the discussions is the role of the African countries. If we want to tackle it globally, we need to don't forget about all these countries that, first of all, is the highest motorization rate, is the fastest growing, and also the most pollutant vehicles. So if we wanted to tackle it globally, we cannot only focus on China, Brazil, Mexico, but also these other parts of the country, of the world.
Thank you very much. Very good point. Yourself, sir.
Thank you. I come from the city of Dar es Salaam, where we are implementing a BRT system. And in Dar es Salaam, most of the road infrastructure is merely meant for the car and not for the people. And we want really to change that. And the reason is that most of our people, particularly 47%, they make their trips by walking. 43% by public transport, no matter how bad it is, and just 6% they have their own vehicles. Now the main challenge, particularly on the road mode, is to share the space on the road. As I've said, the infrastructure is meant for the vehicle, so we need to change so that actually the pedestrians can also be given a share, as well as the cyclists and the mixed traffic, as well as the public transport. For that matter, we need a clear policy on how to change the road space. And that's very, very important, particularly for us who are coming from the sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very clear statement. Just to see if any more female delegates. Yourself, madam, you're going to come in. Anyone else? Yourself, madam. Those will be the last two comments. I'm very sorry if I didn't see anyone. We couldn't fit them all in. So if you keep your hand up, the microphone comes more quickly. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm from the Asian Development Bank and I come from the city of Dhaka. You already know about the situation there. I just want to point out a few things like it is important to avoid pollution. The vehicles that are running on the streets, it is important to manage them in a way that the obsoletes are already excluded from the roads. But that is where the political decision and commitment is needed. So implementation of the commitments is one important issue that I wanted to raise. The other thing is that sometimes there is the conflict of interest, whether to promote the public transport, and if you like in the private sector, and then private sector profitability versus the private sector profitability versus public sector transport. So in our country we face this always, like private sector for raising their prices, sometimes they go on strikes, things like that. So there are issues around those. It's a governance issue. So I think those are some of the issues which also affect not only the people who commute, but those who also walk, because in a crowded city it is very difficult to walk on the roads even if you want to.
Thank you very much indeed. While the microphone goes to the lady in red up at the top, let me just explain what we're going to do, panelists and discussants. I'm going to summarize all of the points that have been made. I'm then going to ask you to comment on one of them each. And with your final comment, which it will be, also to say something about what is required in terms of the next steps of leadership as you see it. Many of the questions have raised that. Madam, you're the last question.
Thank you. Grazie. Vengo da una città indiana dove c'è una rete molto grande. Uno degli studi recenti ci dicono che dei migliaia di utenti della città BRT sono soltanto 100 donne. Quindi non è un problema, cioè è un problema che deve essere risolto per quanto riguarda la differenza di genere. Ci sono problemi legati al prezzo dei biglietti per cui le donne non possono avere accesso ai trasporti, ed è per questo che la risoluzione o la soluzione a questi problemi, ai problemi di trasporto.
Thank you very much indeed. And a wonderful set of comments and questions from the delegates. I apologize to those there wasn't time to include. Colleagues, we heard about the trends for optimism, particularly the trends in the choices that young people are making. We heard about the possible importance of pricing as a mechanism to change transport modalities. We heard about possible importance for IT, both in the management of mobility, but also in changing the need for transport. We heard a very particular set of points about women and women's access to transport and gender, and we heard also, Deputy Minister, about Africa. In your case, we might ask you to comment on two questions. We had a wonderful declaration about young people and mobility. We heard quite a lot about financing and business models and which ones produce which sorts of outcomes. We heard that car ownership is still very much an ideal, but street and road management is potentially a very big challenge. And then underpinning all of this, we had an exhortation for braver, bolder, and more informed leadership and better organization to deliver policies. So, Deputy Minister, beginning with you, I invite you to make a final remark, picking up one or 2 points, and then we will invite everyone in turn. Perhaps the microphone could go to the Deputy Minister, please.
Thank you very much. Let me start by commenting about Africa. I think the critical aspect of Africa is for us to intensify our corridors. Our transport corridors is critical. And on women, I agree about gender mainstreaming of women, particularly with regard to the issue of transport. In South Africa, we have set aside 14.5 billion to connect 14 cities in terms of rapid transport movement. So it's critical that we move in that direction of putting at the center the poor people, because they need the transport more than any other person on earth, particularly the women and the youth.
Thank you very much indeed. Deputy Mayor, your comment?
예, please headset. 예, 우리가 세계 도시 포럼 6차 회의를 이 나폴리에서 하는 것은 굉장히 의미가 있다고 봅니다. 도시의 이동 교통 수단을 자동차 대신 사람 중심으로 저는 갈 수 있다고, 이 전쟁에서 이길 수 있다고 생각합니다. 15세기, 16세기에 이탈리아 르네상스 운동처럼 새로운 패러다임으로 이 운동을 전개한다면 우리가 논의하는 이 모든 문제를 도시와 전 세계로 확대할 수 있다고 생각합니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much, Deputy Mayor. We apologize, but there wasn't an English translation. I don't know if there were with others. But thank you very much for your comment. Mr. Sosa.
Yes, I would like to comment on the issues of prices.
Yes.
Well, prices are very, very important signals in the marketplace. And when we are dealing with the public system of transportation, there is also a price. When we are building and operating a BRT type of system, where investments are lower and operating costs are very manageable by a public company or a private company, probably we won't need subsidies or big subsidies so that the system can go ahead operating for a long time. But if we want, but we need prices that collect all the costs involved in investment and operating the system. If we want to build a bigger system that involves underground structures like a metro system, that sometimes is necessary in bigger cities and more complex situations, the thing is much more expensive. And it is difficult that a city can finance by itself without the help of national government. It is difficult, not impossible, but it's difficult. There are a few cases. And so you need there the help or the support of the national government for providing some finance. But beside that, if you want to get people underground and you have to, and you want to get the most people underground on the metro system, you need to give them a good price. Otherwise, they have other choices and go for the car or remain on the surface. That means that metro system this tendency to need much more subsidies forever than on BRT, a light rail or a surface structure in general. So that has to be considered when you choose one or the other.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Vetrella, one comment and a conclusion.
If you allow me just to give an answer to two questions.
Yes.
Thank you very much. First one, as far as pricing is concerned. It seems to me that could be important to give you the idea of how much in my region we spend for transport. The order of magnitude, the money we give to the companies offering transport is 600 million euro. If you take into account that there are about 6 million of inhabitants, each citizen gives 100 euros per year for the contracts. In addition to the contracts, the company they get the money from the fare of the tickets. In addition to this, we have the order of magnitude of 1.2 billion euros for investment, therefore infrastructures. Therefore, this means that in addition to 100 euros, there are 200 given to the infrastructures, for a total for each citizen of 300 euros per year. And therefore, the problem of pricing becomes extremely important from the point of view of the policy of pricing with respect to the cost of the infrastructure and the cost of the contracts we have. But let me give the answer, or my opinion, let me say, to the problem of technology. I'm an aerospace engineer, therefore my life has been spent sending satellites to Saturn, and so on and so on. And therefore, let me say, when I mentioned technologies moving, I was not mentioning what I consider the existing technology. I mean that this is something that we are using, and it is not difficult from the point of view of the development. And it seems to me that in many countries, mobile phones, not only for information, but also for ticketing and so on and so on and so on. I was mentioning the fact that we are moving from the point of view of technology of transport, from the point of view of the approach of transporting. In my case, for example, I want just to mention the improvement we have made as far as navigation satellites are concerned. When I was working on this, we discussed of about 10 to 20 meters of accuracy from the point of view of the location. But today we are talking of 1 to 10 millimeters of accuracy in the location. That means that we are going in the direction in which also the airplanes will not need anymore the pilots. And this is the same for trains. There are many examples we have in which we are reducing the cost of manpower due to the fact that technology is offering us other possibilities, and so on and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Mr. Baligar, your final comment, your reaction?
I would like to take up the issue of city planning. One of the questions was on how to reduce the need for urban mobility. Yes, especially in new layouts and industrial townships, it is possible to build cities for people. In India, we are developing this big corridor between, industrial corridor between Delhi and Mumbai. It's under conception stage. There we would like to plan 30% of the area for cities, 70% for industrial developments. Similarly, in big cities, whenever any industrial layouts come, we are insisting that at least about 10% of the area should be earmarked for residential purpose, and we should implement the concept of walk to work along with other facilities. The residential layout should have schools, hospitals, and entertainment and shopping complexes. I hope in the future, especially the future cities which are being developed in India, will have this less need to mobility. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We're now on to our final comments. We begin with our discussants. Just a short comments each. We start with Francesca and we move along the line to Connie. I want you to react to one of the questions and say something about the leadership that is required. I think, gentlemen, we're going to have to pass the microphone all the way around.
I'll go back to the thought I expressed before. I hope that our discussion will consider transport as a right, which is something we haven't mentioned yet.
Comment on the trend of people starting to think of their cars less. That is a trend in Germany, India, and Canada, and the combined population is 243 million. The trend in India and China is of people wanting to buy a car, and their combined population is 2.5 billion. So it's 10 times more people wanting to have cars than the ones who are ditching them. It's a matter of magnitude.
What do we do about that, Carlos?
Be a pessimist.
Okay, and get on with the job.
Yeah. it's not enough to have only 243 million thinking of leaving the car.
We don't need to export Germans to China.
Not still.
No. Okay. Adriana?
I would like to comment a little bit on Francesca's point about the common good. I think that space for mobility was seen as almost infinite for a long time. So the notion of being scarce for many countries is quite new. So and this is a big change. And it involves social change. I'm sure this involves technicians, regulations, and social behavior at the last part of it. And this is the part that usually is long. People still believe when they have a problem in traffic and in congestion, what they ask today is still for more roads. I really think there is a cultural change in terms of understanding the common as a common good and then working on it. We investigated in Mexico, and still 2/3 of the investment in transport goes to roads and not transit. So there is a disparity in what is the policy says and what's the final action investment. So the final comment is, I'm sure we can do it and we can really reverse this tendency, but there is a lot of work, and we need the view that it's infrastructure, but especially we have a lot of emphasis in service quality. And this depends as much in the quality, in the infrastructure, the IT, but a lot on the organization of the service itself.
Thank you very much indeed. Holger, please, your reaction and your final comment.
I think there is lots of hope, and I really appreciate also the comment also from the youth representative, because that's also, in fact, the future generation. And here also coming with a clear statement also, we want the quality of life in cities, and we want to have a safe, accessible environment. So I think this is important, and we see in fact also that things change. 30% of the young people under 25 in the US don't have in these days a driving license, and this has been seen as a major risk also for the automobile industry in the US. And so there is also this change, and this change also in the US shows in some cities like in New York you can walk, you can cycle. And lots of people say if you can make it in New York, you can make it everywhere. So therefore, also I think there is a signal clear also to India to learn out of the lessons from the US in the past. Look into all the mistakes and leapfrog and do something new and use the technology, use also the inspiration also from the young people. And I think as a final comment, I think there is a need for urgency. Because the infrastructure and the decision we're making now on infrastructure will influence also how people walk, cycle, take public transport, or have to use a car in the future. So if we're building our cities, rebuilding our cities, improving also our poor areas, low-income housing, the way we're doing it now sets also the scene for the next 50 years. So therefore, it's complex, it's long-term, but also there's a need for action now in terms of the right decisions, so to provide also an environment where we all have a sustainable life and accessibility for all.
Thank you very much indeed, and I think it must be the first time we have heard Frank Sinatra applied to urban mobility. It's very, very good. Connie, the last remark, please.
Thank you. When I was a child and when we had visitors, my parents would send me out to buy cigarettes for our guests. Nowadays, when we have guests, what do we do when they want to smoke? Send them out.
Yeah.
And this shows that the world, in the time span of one generation, has made a fundamental shift in thinking. So I would say to all of those people who say that my city is not Shanghai, stop smoking.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to invite you in a minute to thank our distinguished panelists and our wonderful expert discussants. Let me offer a very brief summary. I think we heard a call to arms. If you like, the underlying idea is that we have to have urgency and ambition coupled with knowledge and patience. And somehow these two ideas have to be put together. We heard a lot about the leadership that is needed, the leadership to integrate systems, and the need for leadership at different points in the system: government, citizens, communities, private sector. We heard a lot about knowledge and quality, becoming better informed about urban mobility issues. And then we heard a lot about the need to motivate change. Partly, if we follow Carlos, the need to motivate change by really understanding the nature of the problem and being in a certain way disappointed by it, but partly also understanding that it's completely possible to create real alternatives if we work very hard at it. And we heard this, I think, from many of our speakers. So on behalf of everyone, may I now thank our distinguished panelists and our discussants. Thank you very much indeed.